The first time Brenda Millstone called the police on me, the flames from my bonfire were licking at a sky bruised purple with twilight. They danced in the cool October air, sending up sparks like frantic, short-lived stars. It was an annual ritual, a quiet communion. In the bottom of the stone-lined pit were the remnants of last year's fire, and on top, I had carefully laid the driest wood from the pile Eleanor and I had stacked together the summer before she was gone. Each log was a memory. The scent of burning oak and pine was her scent. The warmth on my face was her hand on my cheek. It was the one night a year I allowed myself to feel the full, crushing weight of her absence, and in the fire, I found a strange and solemn comfort. Then, through the crackle of the flames, came another sound. A sharp, insistent clicking, the sound of acrylic nails on a smartphone screen, wielded with the furious purpose of a woodpecker attacking a dying tree. I didn't need to turn around. I knew who it was. I could feel the sheer pressure of her disapproval radiating across my lawn, a palpable force field of indignation. "Arthur!" she called out. Her voice was engineered to cut through noise, a thin, reedy instrument of command. "Arthur, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" I turned slowly, letting my eyes adjust from the fire's glow. She stood at the edge of my property line, a perfect silhouette of suburban tyranny against the fading light. Brenda Millstone, President for Life of the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. She was dressed in what she probably considered casual wear. Cream-colored linen trousers that were hopelessly impractical for an evening outdoors, a silk blouse, and a string of pearls that seemed to glow with their own smug luminescence. Her face, a triumph of modern chemistry over the ravages of time and empathy, was pulled into a tight mask of outrage. Her white Range Rover was parked at the curb, engine still humming, its headlights cutting twin beams through the dusk like searchlights hunting for escaped convicts. "I'm having a fire, Brenda," I said, my voice low. "You are creating a public nuisance," she corrected. Her phone still held aloft as if she were documenting a war crime. "This is a flagrant violation of Article 7, Section B, Paragraph 4 of the CC&Rs, not to mention the citywide burn ban." "There is no citywide burn ban, Brenda," I stated. It wasn't a question. Before I even struck the match, I had done what I always do. I had checked the data. City website, county fire marshal's office, state environmental protection agency. All clear. Air quality index was good. Wind was negligible. I had followed procedure, she scoffed, a little puff of air that smelled faintly of her industrial-strength perfume, a chemical sweetness that always made the back of my teeth ache. "I am the president of this association. I think I know a little something about the rules." Big mistake. People like Brenda always confused their title with actual knowledge. It was a common failure mode. They believed the authority they were given somehow imbued them with omniscience. In my old job, that kind of thinking was what led to smoking craters in the middle of cornfields. I was a retired FAA accident investigator. For 40 years, my entire life had revolved around sifting through the wreckage of overconfidence and ignored procedures. I'd learned that the truth wasn't found in the loudest voice, but in the quiet, unchangeable facts buried in the data. "Well," I said, turning back to the fire, "your information appears to be out of date." That was when she escalated. It was her go-to move. When faced with a fact that contradicted her reality, she didn't adjust her reality. She just applied more force. "I have already called the authorities, Arthur. They are on their way. They will explain the rules to you in terms you can understand." The condescension was thick enough to be a physical thing. She said it with a little purr, as if explaining a complex concept to a particularly dense child. The threat was clear. Comply, or be publicly humiliated. For a moment, a different kind of fire burned in my chest, a cold one. The quiet, methodical rage that had fueled my entire career. The rage against sloppy thinking, against arrogance, against the kind of people who caused disasters and then blamed everyone else. I stayed silent. I simply poked the fire with a long iron rod, sending another cascade of sparks into the darkness. Let her bring the authorities. An investigation is only a threat if you have something to hide. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled silently to the curb, its blue and red lights painting the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of Crestwood Estates in strobing, anxious colors. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a weary look that said he'd seen this exact domestic drama 1,000 times. The other was young, eager, his hand resting near his sidearm as if he expected to find a full-blown arsonist. Brenda practically vibrated with vindication. She marched over to them, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my backyard. "There, officers. This man, Arthur Corrigan, he refuses to extinguish this illegal inferno. It's a danger to the entire community." The older officer, whose name tag read Miller, sighed. He walked toward my fence, his partner a step behind him. I met him at the gate. "Evening, sir," Miller said. "We got a call about an illegal fire." "Evening, officer," I replied. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was thick, official cardstock, the kind that feels like it has a trust fund. I handed it to him. "It's not illegal." He unfolded it. His flashlight beam cut across the page. I knew what he was seeing. The official seal of the county, the date, the specific address, the stated purpose. Small recreational fire for personal use. And at the bottom, the most beautiful part, a bold, authoritative signature. Underneath it, the typed name and title, Chief Michael O'Halloran, County Fire Marshal. Officer Miller looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. A slow smile crept onto his face. He'd seen this movie before too, but this was a surprise ending. "Mike O'Halloran?" he asked. "You know the chief?" "We used to be on a bowling league together," I said, before my back went out. He handed the permit back to me, the smile now firmly in place. "Well, sir, everything appears to be in order here. Sorry to have bothered you." He turned to his partner. "We're clear." Brenda was apoplectic. Her face, under the flashing police lights, was a grotesque dance of red and blue shadows. "What? What is that? He can't just have a piece of paper. I am the HOA president. My authority supersedes some bowling buddy's permission slip." Officer Miller's patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and hard as pavement. "This is a legal county-issued burn permit signed by the fire chief himself. It supersedes you, your HOA, and frankly, my desire to stand here listening to you. This is not a police matter. Have a good night, Mr. Corrigan." They got back in their car and drove away, leaving Brenda standing on the sidewalk, bathed in the soft, warm glow of my perfectly legal, deeply personal bonfire. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. She looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping in an environment that could no longer sustain her. She had tried to use the rules as a weapon against me, and she had failed. I knew, in that moment, that she would not let it go. She had been publicly contradicted. Her authority had been challenged and found wanting. For someone like Brenda, that was not just an insult. It was a declaration of war. And I, a man who just wanted to be left alone with his memories and his fire, knew that I was now looking at a new kind of wreckage, and it was my job to investigate it. The war began the following Monday. A crisp, official-looking envelope was taped to my front door. It wasn't mailed. It was placed there, an act of territorial marking. Inside, on thick, creamy letterhead embossed with the Crestwood Estates logo, was the first salvo, a fine. $100 for unapproved landscaping elements. I looked out at my front yard, at Eleanor's garden. It wasn't a manicured, chemically saturated showpiece like Brenda's. It was a chaotic, beautiful tangle of life. Black-eyed Susans fought for space with purple coneflowers. A massive rosemary bush, which Eleanor had called the Beast, dominated one corner. It was exactly as she had left it. I was a systems guy, not a gardener. My only job was to water it and keep the worst of the weeds at bay. To Brenda, it was an eyesore. To me, it was a living memorial. The letter was absurd. The garden had been there for 20 years. It predated Brenda's presidency by a decade. I didn't get angry. I got my notebook, a fresh one, black, hardcover, with gridded paper inside. The kind I used for sketching out accident timelines and stress vector calculations. On the first page, I wrote the date and Brenda Millstone. I taped the violation notice inside. I took a photo of it. I took a photo of the envelope taped to my door. I then went outside and took a dozen high-resolution photos of Eleanor's garden from every conceivable angle. Documentation. It's the foundation of any successful investigation. You don't build a case. You let the evidence build it for you. The next one arrived on Thursday. $200 for improper storage of refuse containers. My trash and recycling bins were kept behind a small, cedar-planked enclosure on the side of my house. The enclosure was specified in the HOA bylaws. I had built it myself to the exact dimensions required. I photographed the letter, the bins in their enclosure, and then I found my original copy of the CC&Rs. I highlighted the relevant section that proved my compliance, scanned it, and filed it digitally alongside the photos. Another entry in the notebook. It became a pattern. A week later, a $500 fine for nuisance smoke, citing the bonfire. This one was particularly audacious, a direct challenge to the authority of the fire chief's permit. I logged it. Then came a citation for the color of my welcome mat. Apparently, natural choir was not on the approved palette of earth tones. Logged. A fine for a barely visible crack in one of my driveway paving stones. Logged. A warning about the excessive height of the oak tree in my backyard, a tree that had been there since before the subdivision was even built. Logged. 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 Brenda was building a case based on fiction. I was building one based on facts. It was a race, and she didn't even know she was in it. I started to expand my investigation beyond my own property. I spent my evenings not watching television, but poring over public records on the county clerk's website. I pulled the original incorporation documents for the Crestwood Estates HOA. I downloaded the meeting minutes for every quarterly and annual meeting for the past 10 years, as far back as the digital records went. I cross-referenced everything. Names, dates, expenditures. A picture began to emerge. A system riddled with single points of failure, all of them leading back to Brenda. She was not just the president. She was also the treasurer and the head of the Architectural Review Committee. She held all the keys. The board consisted of 3 other members. One was a man in his late 80s who hadn't attended a meeting in 3 years. The other 2 were a husband and wife team, the Hendersons, who ran a catering business. A little more digging revealed that their company, Delectable Morsels, was the exclusive caterer for every single HOA-sponsored event, always at a premium price. The contracts were, of course, approved unanimously by the board. This was no longer just harassment. This was starting to smell like a conspiracy. A small, petty, suburban conspiracy, but a conspiracy nonetheless. My quiet rage began to solidify, to cool into something harder and more useful. It was the feeling I used to get when I'd find a maintenance log with a forged signature, or a component part with a counterfeit serial number. It was the thrill of discovery, the cold, clean certainty that I was on the right track. My world, which had grown so small and quiet after Eleanor died, began to expand again. But instead of being filled with her warmth, it was now filled with the cold, hard lines of data points. My house was no longer just a house. It was the primary incident site. The neighborhood was the debris field, and Brenda Millstone was the catastrophic design flaw I was determined to understand and expose. I set up cameras, small, discreet, weatherproof ones. One pointed at my front door, one covering my driveway, and one with a view of the street. It felt like a violation of my own peace, but Brenda had made it clear that my property was now a contested zone. I needed unimpeachable witnesses. The footage captured her, driving slowly past my house multiple times a day, stopping, taking pictures with her phone. Once, she even got out of her Range Rover, walked halfway up my driveway, and peered at the hairline crack in the paver as if it were a fissure leading to the center of the earth. It was all logged, time-stamped, saved to a secure server. I started talking to my neighbors, quietly. I began with Frank, a retired accountant who lived 2 doors down. Brenda had waged a 2-year war against him over the brand of his solar panels. Frank was a numbers guy. He hated inefficiency and waste. When I laid out my initial findings about the catering contract, his eyes lit up with a familiar, predatory gleam. "I knew it," he hissed, tapping a finger on the printout of the HOA budget I'd brought him. I always knew her numbers felt slippery. Look at this line item: Community Beautification. It's a 5-figure slush fund with no itemized receipts. Frank became my first ally. He began his own audit, working backwards from the vague budget reports, requesting official records from the HOA's management company, which was, of course, run by Brenda's cousin. My second ally was a man who noticed things. Mr. Henderson, a quiet widower like myself, lived directly across the street from Brenda. His hobby was birdwatching, which meant he spent hours every day sitting by his front window with a pair of powerful binoculars. He had seen it all. The landscaping trucks that came from a company owned by Brenda's brother-in-law, billing the HOA for work on her private property. The late-night visits from city officials who never seemed to stay long. He had notes, years of them. He had mistaken her corruption for mere eccentricity. I showed him it was a pattern. My investigation was branching out, forming a web. And I knew, with the certainty of a stress analysis predicting a fracture, that somewhere in this tangled system of bylaws, budgets, and backroom deals, there was one critical flaw. One piece of data that would connect it all. One piece of evidence that would make the entire rotten structure collapse under its own weight. I just had to find it. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in the digital archives of the county planning department, a place of mind-numbing zoning codes and endless PDF scans of property deeds. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen. I was looking for something specific. The original master plat for the Crestwood Estates subdivision, filed in 1987. The newer maps on the HOA website were clean, digital renderings, but I wanted the source code, the original document with the surveyor's seal and the handwritten notes. After an hour of searching, I found it. A grainy, scanned image of a massive blueprint. The lines were faint, the text slightly blurred, but it was all there. Lot numbers, property lines, setbacks. And then I saw it. My heart, which I had thought long dormant, gave a sudden, sharp jolt. It was a dotted line. A simple, unassuming dotted line running north to south across the entire subdivision, and next to it, in small, faded capital letters, were the words, 20-foot public utility and emergency access easement. An easement, a ghost on the land, a legal right-of-way that belonged to the county, to the utility companies, to the fire department. It wasn't private property. It had to be kept clear. I followed its path with my cursor, my breath held tight in my chest. It ran along the edge of several properties, clipping the back corners of yards. It crossed Lot 42. It bisected Lot 43. And then, Lot 44. Brenda Millstone's property. It didn't just clip her yard. It sliced right through the middle of her backyard, straight through her prize-winning English rose garden, straight through her meticulously laid flagstone patio, and straight through the foundation of her enormous custom-built gazebo and outdoor kitchen. The one she boasted had cost more than a luxury car. It was beautiful. A perfect, exquisite, fatal flaw, hidden in plain sight for 30 years. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. This was it. This was the hairline fracture in the turbine blade, the faulty rivet in the fuselage, the single critical point of failure from which all other failures cascaded. Brenda had built her castle not just on sand, but on land that wasn't even hers to build on. My investigation immediately pivoted. The fines, the harassment, the financial mismanagement, that was all secondary now. That was the noise of the explosion. The easement was the cause. It was the inciting incident that had been waiting, dormant, for decades. I spent the next 2 days in a state of hyper-focused calm. I drove to the county records office and got a certified, high-resolution copy of the 1987 plat map. The clerk who helped me was a young woman with a nose ring who looked bored until I pointed out what I was looking for. She pulled up the records for Lot 44. Her eyes widened. "Oh," she said. "Oh, wow. Someone is having a bad day." I discovered that the permits for Brenda's backyard oasis, filed in 2015, were a masterclass in obfuscation. The plans submitted to the county conveniently omitted any mention of the easement. The survey attached to the application was not a new, official survey, but a crudely edited copy of an old one. The signature of the county planner who approved it was an illegible scrawl. It reeked of fraud. It screamed of a backroom deal, a favor called in, a blind eye deliberately turned. I now had leverage. Not just leverage. I had a legal nuclear bomb. Reporting this would trigger a cascade of consequences she couldn't possibly control. A demolition order from the county, an investigation into permit fraud, a massive liability for the HOA, which had technically approved the construction. Her reign wasn't just in jeopardy, it was over. She just didn't know it yet. But simply reporting her wasn't enough. That would be like finding a design flaw and just writing a memo. No. A proper investigation concludes with a final report, a presentation of findings, and recommendations to ensure such a failure can never happen again. I wasn't just going to dismantle her little empire. I was going to do it in front of an audience, using her own rules and her own venue against her. The annual HOA meeting was in 3 weeks. It was the perfect stage. The design phase of my revenge began. This was where I felt most at home. I wasn't a confrontational man by nature, but I was a master of building an inescapable logical trap. My kitchen table, covered in maps, documents, and spreadsheets, became my engineering bay. Frank the accountant was my financial analyst. Mr. Henderson, the birdwatcher, was my surveillance chief. We were a small, quiet team of retirees, the kind of men Brenda had dismissed as irrelevant. We were about to become her worst nightmare. The plan had 4 distinct components, each designed for maximum impact. Phase 1. The survey. I hired a professional land surveying company. I didn't tell them the full story. I just said I was considering some landscaping work and needed my property lines and all relevant easements to be officially marked. I paid extra for a rush job. 2 days later, a team of men in bright orange vests arrived. They hammered wooden stakes with pink plastic ribbons into the ground. They marked the corners of my property, and then, as instructed, they marked the full 20-foot width of the public utility and emergency access easement. They started at the north end of the street and worked their way south. The line of stakes and flags marched inexorably down the block, across lawns, through flower beds. And then, they arrived at Lot 44. I watched from my window as they hammered the first stake into the edge of Brenda's immaculate pudding green perfect lawn. Then another, and another, a perfect, straight line of bright pink flags, marching directly towards her beloved gazebo. It was a beautiful, silent invasion. Brenda came storming out of her house, a whirlwind of fury in a cashmere jogging suit. I couldn't hear what she was screaming, but I could see the surveyor calmly showing her his work order and a copy of the plat map. She gestured wildly. She pointed. She stabbed her finger at the paperwork. He just shrugged. He was a professional. He was paid to mark the lines, not to debate their existence. After 10 minutes, she retreated back into her house, defeated. The line of stakes continued its relentless march, a pink-ribboned scar across her pride. Phase 2. The dossier. Over the next week, Frank and I assembled our report. It was a work of art. We compiled everything into a sleek, spiral-bound booklet. The cover read, "A System Failure Analysis of the Crestwood Estates HOA." Inside, we laid out the case, section by section. The easement violation, complete with high-resolution photos of the survey stakes running through her outdoor kitchen. The fraudulent permit application. A full financial breakdown by Frank, highlighting the catering contract, the landscaping slush fund, and a dozen other questionable expenditures. Statements from other neighbors, anonymized but detailing years of harassment and selective enforcement. We made 50 copies, one for every household we expected to attend the meeting. Phase 3. The authorities. This was the critical step. I didn't want this to be a simple HOA squabble. I wanted it to have real, legal teeth. I bundled our findings into 3 separate, meticulously organized packages. The first, detailing the permit fraud and easement obstruction, was hand-delivered to the county planning department and the fire marshal's office. The second, detailing Frank's financial analysis of potential embezzlement and fraud, was sent via certified mail to the county's financial crimes unit. The third, focused on the potential unlicensed contractor work and bid rigging, went to the state licensing board. I didn't ask for immediate action. I simply presented the information and stated that the full details would be made public at the HOA meeting on October 27th. I was baiting the hook. I wanted them to be there. Phase 4. Psychological warfare. This was the most subtle and, in my opinion, the most elegant part of the plan. 2 days before the meeting, I sent Brenda a certified letter. It was a simple, formal notice. It stated that, as a concerned homeowner, I would be presenting a motion at the annual meeting. The motion was to demand the immediate removal of all structures, landscaping, and other obstructions from the 20-foot public utility and emergency access easement located on Lot 44, in accordance with County Ordinance 117.3 and the original subdivision plat of 1987. I was giving her exactly what she claimed to want: a strict, unyielding enforcement of the rules, not her made-up rules, the real ones. I gave her 2 days to panic. 2 days for her to scramble, to call her contacts, to realize that the official channels she had so expertly manipulated were now turning against her. I wanted her walking into that meeting already off balance, already defensive. The first rule of a controlled demolition is to weaken the structure before you push the plunger. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had spread. The surveyor's stakes, the hushed conversations over fences, my quiet encouragement for everyone to attend. It had worked. Usually, these meetings attracted a dozen or so of the most disgruntled residents. Tonight, there were over 100 people crammed into the small room. The air was thick with anticipation. Brenda and the other 2 board members sat at a long table at the front, looking flustered by the turnout. Brenda, however, quickly regained her composure. She was dressed in a severe navy blue power suit, her face a carefully applied mask of serene authority. She saw the crowd not as a threat, but as a larger audience for her own magnificence. She began the meeting with her usual dictatorial flair, breezing through the agenda. The minutes from the last meeting were approved without being read. The treasurer's report, a single page with vague, inflated numbers, was presented without questions being allowed. And then she came to her favorite part. "And now," she said, a thin, cruel smile on her lips, "we move to new business. Specifically, the board has been forced to address an ongoing issue with repeat offenders who refuse to adhere to community standards." Her eyes locked on me. "Mr. Corrigan, we have a thick file of your violations: unapproved landscaping, nuisance smoke, improper driveway maintenance. The fines have now reached several $1,000s. The board has voted to place a lien on your property." A gasp went through the room. A lien. The nuclear option in the HOA world. This was my cue. I stood up slowly. I was holding my dossier. "Actually, Madam President," I said, my voice calm and even, carrying easily in the silent room, "I believe there is another item of new business that takes precedence." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "You are out of order." "No," I said, walking towards the front of the room. "I am perfectly in order. As per the notice I sent you, I am presenting a motion to the homeowners." Frank and Mr. Henderson stood up and began handing out the dossiers to every person in the room. A quiet rustle of paper filled the air. I had a small projector with me. I set it on the table, aimed it at the blank wall behind Brenda's head, and switched it on. The first image that appeared, 10 feet high, was the 1987 county plat map. I used a laser pointer to trace the dotted line of the easement. "But this," I began, "is the foundational document of our community. And this line is a public utility and emergency access easement. It must be kept clear. It is not a suggestion. It is the law." The next slide was an aerial photograph of Brenda's house. I superimposed the easement line over it. It cut a brutal, undeniable path through her backyard paradise. "As you can see," I continued, "the easement runs directly through Lot 44. The next slide. A close-up photo of the survey stakes. The pink ribbons fluttering, running straight into the stone base of her gazebo. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were looking from the picture on the wall to the booklets in their hands. Their eyes wide, Brenda shot to her feet. "This is an outrage. This is slander. This is my private property." "No, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping a little, becoming harder. "It is not. It has never been. And you knew that when you filed this." The next slide was a copy of her fraudulent permit application. I pointed out the doctored survey, the missing easement notation, the suspicious signature. Her face, which had been a mask of controlled anger, began to crack. The Botox held the skin tight, but her eyes were wild with panic. "Lies! These are all lies! You fabricated this! Did I fabricate the catering contracts with your brother-in-law?" I clicked to the next slide. It was Frank's financial analysis, showing tens of thousands of dollars of HOA funds funneled to delectable morsels without a competitive bid. The Hendersons, the husband and wife board members, went pale. "Did I fabricate the landscaping bills for work done on your personal property, charged to the Community Beautification Fund?" The next slide showed invoices from her brother-in-law's other company. The meltdown began. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a structural failure in slow motion. Her composure, which had been her greatest weapon, shattered like cheap glass. "He's a bitter, lonely old man," she shrieked, her voice climbing an octave. "He's trying to destroy our beautiful community because he's miserable. He couldn't even keep his own wife's garden from turning into a weed patch." A collective intake of breath from the room. She had crossed a line, a sacred one. Even her most ardent supporters winced. The cold rage in my chest burned white-hot, but my voice remained steady. "You are an expert on weeds, Brenda. You've been planting them in this community for a decade." That's when the back doors of the clubhouse opened. 2 men in suits and a woman in a sheriff's department uniform stepped inside. They were not patrol officers. They were detectives. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on the chaos at the front. One of the men held up a badge. "Brenda Millstone?" he asked, his voice cutting through her sputtering. "We're from the county's Economic Crimes Unit. We have a warrant to search your home and to seize all financial records of the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. You need to come with us." The entire room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector. Brenda stared at them, her mouth agape. Her husband, who had been sitting beside her looking like a hostage for the entire meeting, put his head in his hands. The woman in the sheriff's uniform stepped forward. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of a system finally being corrected. The sound of a long overdue failure being contained. It was the sound of justice. The aftermath was swift and total. Brenda Millstone's downfall was as complete as it was public. She was charged with multiple counts of felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her brother-in-law's companies were implicated, losing their licenses and facing their own set of charges. The Hendersons, facing their own legal jeopardy, cooperated fully with the prosecution, detailing years of financial manipulation and backroom deals orchestrated by Brenda. The county, presented with my irrefutable evidence, issued a demolition order for the illegal gazebo and outdoor kitchen. Brenda and her husband were forced to pay for the demolition themselves, a cost that ran into the tens of thousands. They had to sell the Range Rover. Then they had to sell the house to cover the mounting legal fees and the court-ordered restitution to the HOA. The last I saw of them, They were loading boxes into a U-Haul truck, their faces gray and pinched. They didn't just lose their power, they lost everything. They were erased from the community they had once terrorized. Our little HOA was thrown into chaos, but it was a cleansing chaos. The old board was dissolved in disgrace. A special election was held, and a new board was formed, led by Frank the accountant. They asked me to serve, but I politely declined. I agreed only to act as a pro bono technical advisor, to help them rewrite the bylaws to ensure the kind of systemic failure Brenda represented could never happen again. We put in checks and balances, term limits, and mandatory independent financial audits. We engineered a better system. The court ordered Brenda to repay over $200,000 in embezzled funds back to the community. After much discussion, the new board decided what to do with the windfall. They paid my legal fees and the cost of the survey. Then, with the bulk of the money, they established the Eleanor Corrigan Good Neighbor Fund. It was a grant program to help residents, particularly the elderly or those facing financial hardship, with the cost of essential home and yard maintenance. It was a fund designed to build community, not punish it. They also used a portion of the money to build a small community park by the pond at the entrance to the subdivision. They planted an oak tree, and in front of it, they placed a simple, elegant stone bench. The small bronze plaque on it reads, "In memory of Eleanor Corrigan, she made things grow." Sometimes, on cool evenings, I walk down there and sit on her bench. I look at the new community, the one that rose from the wreckage of the old one. The neighbors talk to each other now. There's a sense of shared ownership, of relief. The reign of arbitrary, cruel rules is over, replaced by a simple, shared desire to live in peace. Tonight, a year after it all began, I am back in my yard. The stone fire pit is clean, ready for new memories. The logs are stacked high. The air is crisp and smells of impending autumn. I strike a match, and the kindling catches, the small flame growing steadily, voraciously. I learned a long time ago, sifting through twisted metal and shattered lives, that systems don't fail all at once. They fail slowly, then suddenly. A single ignored stress fracture, a tiny component operating outside its design limits, a small act of corruption allowed to fester. People like Brenda Millstone are a force of nature. They are entropy. They will, if left unchecked, tear any system apart through the sheer force of their own ego. You can't reason with entropy. You can't appeal to its better nature. You can only do what I did. You document it. You analyze it. You expose it to the light. You build a better, stronger system designed to withstand it. And then, when the work is done, you sit back, enjoy the quiet, and let the fire burn.